Hey everybody, my name is Nick Kakamisi, and I am presenting over Chapter 12, International Business and Globalization. Before we get going, I thought it would be good to include a brief roadmap for everybody to kind of see where everything is going to be in this presentation. We'll do it pretty similar to how the book goes. Started out with a discussion case and subsequently move forward to the introduction and on to the end of the chapter, down to democracy and cultural integrity and human rights. The business I chose for my discussion case is Domino's, and how they deployed this market scheme that was extremely successful until it came to a bitter end here in the United States. I picked this because I think it really illustrates how businesses operate in a global context. And I think it really relates to the chapter. We'll be referring back to this pretty regularly. Okay, so in order to see the significance of this discussion case in a global context, we have to first see it where it all began, here in 1984. Domino's Pizza began this 30-minute delivery guarantee in 1984, but how this was birthed was because Domino's was searching for a market. They were trying to find any kind of competitive advantage they could have over this, and they kind of come up with this genius scheme. They figure out what people want, and what people want are hot pizzas, and they want and they can trust a business that's guaranteeing this, and Domino's really figures this out. And so this concept really serves as the backbone of Domino's rapid growth into the largest pizza delivery company in the world. So you may ask yourself, what made Domino's so much different than all the other large pizza establishments around the country, such as Pizza Hut? Well, Domino's kind of set the stage when it comes to just speed of service. Domino's didn't have restaurants. They purely focused on delivery and how to get that delivery to you quickest. And that's really where they excelled. So this serves for Domino's profit model in the United States for a long, long time, until in 1993 this all kind of comes to an end because a Domino's delivery driver hits a Missouri woman named Jean Kinder. Lawyers submit a very convincing claim arguing that these delivery drivers and this delivery guarantee had contributed to numerous accidents around the country. And this argument did have merit. If you look back, Domino's had settled plenty of disputes with victims. Anyways, the Missouri Circuit Court ultimately ruled in favor of Kinder and ordered the company, Domino's, and the local franchises involved to pay Kinder $750,000 in actual damages and $78 million in punitive damages. Now let's pause right there. $78 million in punitive damages. That's a big statement from a government. That is a legal statement that practically says that you've engaged in business practices that aren't safe to your employees or your consumers. And so as a result, the company eliminates the 30-minute promise in the United States. You can imagine that Thomas Monaghan was not happy, the president of Domino's, going so far as to saying that this award was shocking and out of line with the factual circumstances of the case. Now that we've heard Domino's trials and tragedies in the United States, how does this all tie in to business in a global context? Let's move to India, Domino's second largest market. And what's so different? Well, the biggest difference is the 30-minute guarantee has remained operational. what does this imply, and what does this tell us? Between the United States and India's, whereas it might be viewed as an ad or so, per se, here, this is literally how they run their market in India. It's the model that it's the operational model that Domino's uses. And what I mean by this is if you don't have food that's delivered fast in this particular culture, in this case, India, you don't have anything to compete in this market at all. It's either fast food, fast delivered food, or nothing in India. Here we kind of just dive into the history a little bit more of this 30-minute guarantee. And when they took this to India in 1996, it wasn't guaranteed for the company at all. As a matter of fact, a lot of the articles I read said that the company could have gone bankrupt had this gone wrong in India because they put so much into it. But in a nutshell, India was an infant market. Not many people knew about pizza in India, so it's a risk in its own right there. And the concept of mainstream food delivery is not really, a big thing in 1996 in India yet. You don't see the lights of Domino's Pizza on the side of the streets, and get that real feel for an urban, industrialized society type of feel. Another thing about a developed economy versus an undeveloped economy. We tend to take for granted all the streets that we have and stuff like that. But in India, not to say they don't have streets and they don't have all that kind of stuff. It's just not, it's not to where we are today on ours. And the traffic condition, India is very, very dense population, and it's tough to get around. So if you can imagine, they're hitting on something here, trying to get fast pizza and guaranteeing it in this market as well. The result, well, you can imagine, they quite literally end up creating an entire food delivery market. It was extremely successful because they knew who their customers were. They knew who their consumers were. Indian consumers are different than consumers in Europe. They're different than consumers in America. Indian consumers they're highly demanding. They want stuff done, and they want it quickly. They're price conscious, so they love the idea of getting their money back. And not to say that we're not. I just think that these are more predominant traits in this society, in this culture. And here we get another glimpse of how this business kind of adapts to this market. So here you got a picture on the right of the very dense and populated streets in India. So how do we get pizza to our consumers in 30 minutes in a population like this? Well, we buy mopeds. Mopeds are easier than cars. People can get inside and out of the streets. But can you imagine if Domino's had to conform to the same standards that we have in the United States? Their business wouldn't be successful in India. And these practices more or less are accepted in India. But we'll learn here soon that just because it's accepted doesn't make it right or excusable. So now that we've set the stage for chapter 12, what is it all about? We're going to examine a range of ethical issues. And for the most part, these issues can be grouped up into two groups, and that's issues that arise on the level of business and business managers who must decide on the applicability of their own ethical standards on foreign lands, and ethical issues that are going to be grouped under this term, globalization. Ethical relativism and cross-cultural values. Relativism is important when we think about ethical issues involving international business. Desjardins kind of brings this up in chapter 2, when he kind of considers the issue raised by child labor, the issue of child labor. It's this issue of Western business being criticized for using or relying on child laborers that work under these harsh conditions to produce these expensive consumer goods. And a common response to this criticism are that they are accepted in host countries, and therefore the Western critics have no justification for imposing their own cultural norms on these others. And this, kind of in a nutshell, is ethical relativism. Relativism presents serious challenges to business ethics because it denies that we can even make a choice at all. The challenges of ethical relativism begin to present themselves in pretty practical terms in the context of global business. Let's take a look at some of these challenges. First, we shouldn't be so quick to conclude that diverse cultures do in fact hold diverse ethical values. Just because something is widespread does not mean that it's accepted. Jordan's example given on page 265, and he says that only when the corrupt regime was overthrown did it actually eliminate the fact that Indonesians share very similar values as we do. Another challenge that arises is the distinction between ethical principles and the application of those principles. So let's say in order to do business, we must first obtain a license from the state, and the state is corrupt again and has asked for a bribe. For a local business owner, failure to pay could literally mean the end of his business. And multinational, given that the multinational corporations are not at all in similar circumstances, it makes sense that this behavior coming from, MNCs is much less reasonable. So in this sense, for the local business, bribes or extortions is not so much accepted or justifiable, rather than in some cases, it is understandable. All right, so another issue that arises concerns the virtue of integrity. Kind of illustrate this point, let's say you're working in foreign lands that treat women as second-class citizens. Just for hypothetical reasons, let's say that in this culture you can only hire women for small jobs. Women couldn't participate with other firms, and you got to walk them everywhere they go. Here, it seems the only option you could run into issues because our only options would be to abandon our own principles or stick to our principles and walk away from the business in that particular culture. So you can run into issues here as well. And the fourth issue concerns whose values are unethical anyways. We're all different and we're all valuable. So in that sense, whose are better than the others. To me, that this point is of particular importance. As human beings, it's hard for us to see past our cultural bounds. So with that in mind, are there any values that can be reasonably applied universally applied across culture? We are different, and as such, our business strategies differ as we move business across space. And Tom Donald argues not so fast that there are values that do not change across space. He believes that the fundamental human rights can provide the basis for a list of international responsibilities. And here are these duties. These rights create duties for others. And on first glance, these seem to be a decent list of responsibilities, and it satisfies what Desjardins calls the minimalist approach. And Donaldson holds that business is free to pursue its economic interest as long as certain minimum moral rights are not violated in the process. However, there are challenges to this list. And first, it does not explain why that the responsibilities correlated with these rights should fall on the shoulders of multinational businesses in the first place. And a second opposition would be many of these duties seem more appropriately to belong to governments and not private businesses in the first place. For these reasons, we need a better list. So, the Georgia's list of international responsibilities seems to work for several more specific international responsibilities for businesses to follow. Thus, Donaldson's minimalist approach outlines general rights and responsibilities, while this list specifies in more detail the implications that these rights and duties have for businesses operating internationally. All right, so now we move forward to globalization and international business, and we're going to kind of figure out what this term is all about. It's broadly defined as a process of international economic integration. And in today's world, business decisions can have a huge influence on international affairs. I kind of talk about the global financial crisis. It was a global financial crisis. When the American economy fell, the whole world's fell because they were all tied. We're all global. We're all interconnected. Globalization is this process of extending this free and open competition across international borders. As international competition for labor, jobs, and resources increase, capital increases, and as capital increases, so does the well-being for everybody. And in this sense, globalization is a really good thing. But how can all these issues arise as it relates to globalization? So issues concerning globalization can fall into three main categories. That arises with this term globalization is that it harms rather than benefits the poor. And this interconnected economies kind of incentivize and create these sweatshop conditions. And, one comeback for this is that, we could pay wages at comparable rates of living. So it might not be fair for a business to move to a smaller economy where the price of living, isn't as much and have to pay $10. But at the same time, it's not fair to pay them $3. One thing to do is pay comparable wages, and to kind of see this, take the price of living in Memphis versus the price of living in New York. It takes significantly more money to live in New York than it does to live in Memphis. So we could see that as a domestic version of this global problem. Another problem that we see in globalization and economic integration is that it carries with it this incentive to weaken or do away with environmental health and safety regulations. Kind of like an NBA team would want LeBron James because it would improve their chances of winning a championship. Foreign countries want big businesses to come to them because it addresses their poverty issue. Their big businesses coming over actually helps them. It doesn't hurt them. But at the same time, when a country is willing to lower their ethical standards in an attempt to look more attractive for a business, it can be a dangerous thing as well. Another issue is globalization undermines rather than supports equal rights and self-determination. Another way this is often expressed is that private corporations are replacing legitimate governments, the true international decision makers. Just the IMF and the World Bank's economic policies restrict our self-determination. Straitjacket example is one that we see in the book, and it's this point that Thomas Friedman points out, that basically these countries put on a straitjacket that narrows the political and economic choices of those in power to relatively tight parameters. And it's interesting. I won't read you all of it because I know we're running long. But as a result of a bunch of these things, he says, your economy grows and your politics shrink. The golden straitjacket narrows the political and economic choices of those in power to relatively tight parameters. I put the picture of the horse blinders up there because I think that's kind of what he's saying is once these countries submit to these policies, they basically have to put on this blinder that restricts their choices. And they kind of do this under a smokescreen. It's an interesting theory, but a good defense is that most of these institutions were created by and owe their continual existence to decisions made by individual nations. So these institutions that exist and only have authority because nations have agreed to have them exist with authority. Direct grants of financial aid and food and goods, while no doubt is necessary in many cases in the short term, does not seem like a very effective long-term strategy. I had a professor one time that brings up the example of dropping aid into a dictatorship. What if you drop the aid? Are you dropping the aid into the people, into the hands of the people, or into the hands of one government or one man that's gonna, take this and take it for himself? Who are you dropping your aid to? And here are my presentation review questions. Number one, if a company's market strategy is deemed unsafe in a developed market, is it unethical to deploy those same strategies in an undeveloped market? Number two, how might business decisions vary across different cultures? Number three, what are universal rights anyways? Do you think it's important to set clear universal standards for businesses operating internationally? Does economic growth necessarily correspond to being better off? Thank you. This presentation has really kind of opened my eyes to viewing things through a cultural perspective and how important it is to view things in a cultural perspective. And I found this quote on the internet. I'm not really sure who wrote it, but I thought it really made sense to throw it in. If you change the lens, you change your perspective, and if you change your perspective, it'll alter your life experience. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.